On today's episode of Spirit Inspire, we talk with Family Renewal Project's new Catholic counselor, Andrew Van Roie, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host today, as usual, John Soul. Joined with me is my co-host, Vincent Ricketts. Hello, Vincent.
Howdy.
Hello again. So joined with me today with Vincent is our good friend, Andrew Van Roie. He is the new counselor for Family Renewal Project and the Good Shepherd Institute of the Bluegrass, and he'll be starting very shortly. So welcome, Andrew, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, John.
Awesome. So, Andrew, this is kind of an opportunity just for everyone who follows Spirit Inspire to get to know you, get to know your heart, your passion, where you're coming from, maybe your faith journey, but also the importance of the call that maybe God has placed on your heart, especially for those in the Archdiocese of Louisville with Family Renewal Project. So maybe get started by what was your own faith journey like, and how did that get you here on some level?
Well, honestly, so the thing that I tell everybody when they ask me why I chose counseling, the honest to God truth is my mom gave me an ultimatum at 27 saying, get out of the house, go back to school, or get a job, like a full-time job. Because I was kind of like, aimlessly just doing whatever after graduation of undergrad. So I just decided to go back to school. And even more funny, my mom was like, I think Franciscan or Divine Mercy University, they have really good counseling programs. I think you'd be good at that. I was like, okay, that sounds good to me. Just like, whatever. So that's what kind of threw me down this path. And, in those days, I would have thought it's like, just random, but it's definitely providence because my life has turned around incredibly since then.
Yeah. I'm thinking of so many of those who, it seems like such a unexpected story. Like, we figured you would have been studying for this all your life, and that you would have had this big plan, that there would have been some like deeper experience. But in many ways, like, is that not many people's common experience?
Is that not everybody's almost? I hear of those people who say, I wanted to be an astronaut from age 4. And I'm like, I didn't know what I wanted to do until like 27. Even then, like, did I really want to? I kind of just did what I was told, and then I made it my own later. That's kind of how I've gotten through life. I think it's just, in my opinion, it's like a undiagnosed ADHD, kind of a troublesome little boy when I was a kid, just doing whatever.
Are you allowed to self-diagnose as a counselor?
No, certainly not. But like,
that's funny.
I'm not going to go into the details of a lot of my childhood stories, but I was a terror. Yeah.
Sure.
So
it sounds like this has been helpful for you, and maybe that's why a lot of men and women become counselors, because they needed it themselves, and that was part of their journey.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely going into counseling or psychology a lot of it is self-discovery in the beginning. The first semester at Franciscan, I believe that would be fall of 22. Yes. I'm not very good with dates. Was eye-opening. There was a lot of stuff going on in my life before that, for the previous decade or so, and the program of counseling really emotionally draws you out of yourself, and a lot of people were afraid of it.
What do you mean by that?
So, one of our classes was called groups. We call it groups. I remember what the official title is called. I think it's just group counseling, where it puts you in with a bunch of your classmates and you simulate as if you're giving a group session where you're the leader and everyone else is there for whatever reason they're there for. Let's say it's 12-step groups.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it's that, but 12 steps, they don't really have a leader per se, but let's just say that. And you kind of just had to be honest with yourself and your classmates. And a lot of people were afraid of it in the beginning. It was their most feared thing. And it was my favorite part of the week because I could finally talk about things that I had never talked to people about because, I didn't care enough about it, or I just pushed it off. So it was definitely a eye-opening. A time of discovery for me after 27 years of kind of like wishy-washy living.
Well, it's interesting to me, your mom even suggested these two very Catholic environments. Like, where did that come from? Because any other counseling place could have been the suggestion of your mom. Like, where did that come from?
My mom and my dad, my parents, are definitely they're kind of my saviors in terms of my life. I'm raised cradle Catholic. I've never questioned my faith, but I've always been really lukewarm. I still have difficulty with prayer, like personal prayer and stuff. But I really ascribe to like the sense of seeing God as like not an overlord in a bad way, but like someone like in the military, like your commander who you like respect and you love because of who he is. And so following that thought back to my parents, like you would say the rosary all the time growing up, and I still, even now, to this day, have a little voice in my head whenever I try to say the rosary with my wife or people want to say it. I have a little moment of like annoyance because like it reminds me of those days when you're like a little preteen or whatever teenager, and you're like all edgy and you're so grumpy and you don't want to say the rosary with your family, but you do it anyway because your parents make you and you have to and you should.
Right.
What was that thought? What did we start off with that?
So the thought is like your mom suggested Steubenville Divine Mercy.
Yeah. And my parents have been really good at keeping us informed and formed in the faith, which also helps. I'm melancholic, so I'm a deep thinker, they say, according to psychology. I think more, I'm a very external thinker. So as you'll see here, I'll probably start going off on these things and follow back and connect points, and then I'll forget your original question.
Well, join the club.
Yes.
That's a lot of us. It's
I've
okay.
learned that, yeah. So, yes. She believed that counseling and psychology are best learned in a faith-informed environment. A lot of people say faith-based, but if counseling and psychology was faith-based, you would be teaching from Catholic ideals, well, rather Catholic-like theories, which we don't have. That's not how we do it. Right. We just believe in like the person, theology of the body, all of that stuff, everything. You go into that for hours and hours. But to keep it simple, Franciscan University in Steubenville and then Divine Mercy University in Virginia, just across the river from where I lived at the time, were like the only two truly Catholic institutions that would teach counseling or psychology from that faith-informed perspective.
That's a totally different thing. Yeah.
So why Catholic counseling? And I mean on a personal level, but I also mean like from the perspective of, your average person who would like or needs counseling. Why should they go, especially if they are Catholic, to a Catholic counselor rather than just any
other counselor?
Yeah, well, there's a simple answer and a more difficult, convoluted answer. And
we'll start with simple and work your way then.
I mean, for me, the phrase faith informed is, I will help you get through whatever issues you have, but I'll do it in a way that keeps your humanity intact. And we can get into, the gender identity dysphoria and all that topic is super complex. But at the base of it, you can go to a secular counselor. And in a lot of states like California, a few states like California and Canada, they mandate that you affirm it. But the entire point of psychology is to be neutral, and you never impress your ideals on people. So when you're Catholic and faith informed, you're going to be thinking of the person, their soul, who they are as a person, not just like their diagnosis. Oh, you're depressed. Well, no, it's the same thing you say in medical stuff. You don't label them with their diagnosis or their sickness. Oh, you're a cancer patient? No, you're a human who has cancer and you're suffering. How can I help you?
Never thought about it that way. Yeah, I never considered that. That's kind of what we do.
Yeah, well,
with psychological diagnoses, that's how we say you are depressed.
We label people, yeah. So, and even further, in psychology and counseling, we call them clients. Because in patients, as a doctor, you're acting on them for something. As a client, you're working with them. Wow. So you're my client, you come to me for my services, but we're equal. Like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. It's more like, all right, you're depressed. Why? I'll just ask you questions. And, there's all kinds of theories, techniques, etc., to elicit a deeper response from people. I mean, I've gone through a little bit when I was at Franciscan. I got some free counseling just by being a student. And the gentleman there who was my counselor, all he really does is ask me questions. And the beginning of counseling is just to talk. Like, I'm not going to jump right into, oh, you're depressed, let's just do this. It's no, like, tell me about who you are. So full circle to, like, why Catholic counseling? It really just boils down to, if you're informed by the greater good, truth, Dr. Meyer, who was on this podcast about a year ago, I was with him for about a month before I took over fully and he left. He would always say, speak the truth in love. And he says, which I'm trying to learn a lot from his example. He's a very humble, very holy man. He says, like, if you're speaking the truth, when the truth is the greatest good, it's the highest good, in love, in the way that is the most approachable and gentle, like, that's the best way to find the answer for people. So if Vincent came to me with, some marital problems, which I couldn't do that because I can't counsel friends or people I know. That's against ethics and stuff. But theoretically,
I also don't have marital problems. Sarah right knows.
If you were to come to me with
I have to talk to Lucia about that one.
if you were to come to me with that, it'd be more of like, all right, well, what's going on? Like, everyone has these issues, but like, what is happening in your life that is creating these problems? I'll just stop there, and it can get much more complicated. Yeah.
Sure.
There was something that you said towards the beginning of that that I want to hone in on a little bit and see what your thoughts are. You said, why Catholic counseling? Because it helps, something like it helps keep your humanity intact. It's keeping your humanity intact.
Yeah.
And there's my mind goes a few different places, and I want to get your thoughts on this. So first of all, there's the keeping your humanity intact, in kind of like what you said, looking at the person holistically. Like, you are not, right? Maybe you are experiencing depression, but you are not depressed in like the most absolute sense. That is not who you are. But then there's also this fundamental Catholic anthropology, which is so clearly articulated in the theology of the body that, you are your body and you are your soul, that this body-soul composite that makes up the human person that is basically unknown to the modern mind.
Yeah, those who think the body is just a prison holding in our soul.
Right. And I mean, I've had these conversations with my wife before, because she got a psychology bachelor's, and I mean, her classes are all very, very secular, unfortunately. And it frustrates me so much, like the concept of secular psychology, because of course psyche just means soul, right? In Greek, that's the etymology of the word. It's the study of our soul. So yeah, what do you make, like, how does the fundamental Catholic anthropology, that is to say who we are, what it means to be human, how does that inform your practice and your understanding of counseling?
Yeah, well, you mentioned secular society uses their own, like, they teach psychology the way they do, and that's a good point, because I mean, even all the texts that we use at Franciscan were all secular. It's psychology. It's not secular, it's not Catholic. It's just what we've learned about, the human mind in the ways that we do to...
Sorry, what I meant by pointing out that it was secular was just that these are people that many of them even deny the existence of a soul.
So that's I'm more qualifying where I'm going to go with this. Yeah. And so, like, on that note, as I've been saying, faith-informed counseling is, we're taking the body of knowledge that we have and we learn from in psychology counseling, they're interchangeable, at least word-wise.
As far as what people understand the words to mean, right?
We take that, and for example, one of my professors in one of our classes, he took the ACA, Handbook of Ethics, the American, I think it's there's the APA handbook and the ACA handbook. Whichever one is like, it's probably the ACA.
Right, and this is where you're getting into some of the legal distinctions with separate
and so,
boards
like,
and all of
it's
that.
the ethical handbook of what we should be doing. And it says, you may not impress your ideals upon people. And then he said, what's wrong with this sentence? Or rather, what do you think about the sentence? Because they try to be unbiased, like you answer for yourself. And he said, well, that itself is a belief that they're impressing upon you. So it's like they're telling you something when they do it themselves to you. And that bleeds straight into affirmative care of anybody comes to you saying that I want to be this, I want to be that. So
right, the most neutral position to me seems to be grounded in the truth of things.
Yeah, so if someone comes in, he or she's going to say, I feel like this today or something. It's like, okay, tell me about it. I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm just like, okay. Or if they come in with depression and they are already, something else or whatever they want to be now, I'm not even going to address it because it's not what they came for. First of all, what does the client want? Second of all, how can I help you with what you're doing? That was a dual tangent. What was your original question? What do I think of this?
I think so.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
The three of us, it's like, I don't know what's going on. But yeah, it was something like, I remember now. It was, how does the fundamental Catholic anthropology inform how you practice and understand counseling?
Well, as you said, most people who practice counseling or psychology are going to be secular, and they're going to come at it from the point of like, what can I do to help this person? Which I assume that most people and almost all people in psychology counseling have I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they have good intentions. But very often I've met people who've gone through counseling and their therapists kind of just like rode the waves and didn't really like push into anything deeper. It's so common where an individual go into their counseling sessions for years and they get nothing out of it because the counselor is not driven or not interested in them getting better. They're just there to like spend the time and let's talk about whatever you want, man, kind of stuff. Where it's like, okay, no, I need you. The therapist needs to also, give their side to help the person. If I go to a doctor with a headache and he's like, all right, yeah, just think happy thoughts and you'll be fine. It's like, no, you got to give medication, like some Tylenol or something. Right. It's pretty simple and not super one-to-one right there. But
right, well, bias is just another way of saying worldview.
Yeah, that's a really good way to say
so
it.
you can't be completely neutral in...
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not even alive.
Possible.
Basically, neutrality in that sense would be death. But in this case, it's more like, what is the ultimate reality of things? And what is the worldview that actually leads to prosperity and existence and life?
Well, so when someone comes into me, my first thought is you're a child of God. You're just like me. We have equal worth. We're all equal value to God, and we should all treat each other like that. So how can I help you as another person become I think it's either something a saint said or maybe even JP2 said, like become
He's a saint. Right.
True. Become like who you're fully supposed to be. Like the more good you do, the closer you are to being who you should be. Because we're all sinful and we're not perfect. So like the closer we get to perfection and holiness, we're being more who we're supposed to be. Because God created us all with the intention of us living with him forever. Yeah. So, if you're having addiction or you have some ailments, etc., you're not who you're fully supposed to be at that time. So you need to, get over that. That's some loaded terminology.
And there are many layers to that.
Yeah.
How do you help people guide through those layers and hurdles?
Yeah, that's a good question. You just walk with them through it. You don't pull them along. You don't have them pull you. You come next to them and you say, let's walk through your stuff. Like what's going on here? And as we've said, you don't tell them what to do, and you don't like beat them over the head with anything. Like if so many people will come in with, again, like some gender ideology problem, and those typically come, at least from what I've heard, from traumas in the past. That's very common. So they come in with that, and a lot of people will be like, you need to stop doing that, it's sinful. And it's like, no, like they're not in a position they want to be in, obviously. Or an alcoholic comes in and you say, stop drinking, silly. Like obviously they know that, but they're compelled to drink because they've lost their willpower.
And there's something underlying that they haven't dealt with.
There. Yeah, and very often it's, childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences, So many things.
Now, how do you sort through the stigma of counseling? Is that something that you ever face with people that you interact with?
Well, the classic trope of men don't cry is very similar.
Because that's going to be a resistance to people even beginning to delve into those layers.
A lot of people just don't want to go in because they think it'll be okay. A lot of people don't want to go in because they don't want to talk about their feelings. They think it's weakness or whatever. I mean, for one, when I went to counseling, I can talk a lot about what I've gone through. When it comes to any emotions, I kind of clam up because I am kind of, I won't say emotionless, but I definitely have some stuff in my past where I kept that door shut for very long, and now there's so much behind it. If you open it, it's all going to fly out. So yeah, just walking with them, not judging them, making them feel that they're loved, that you're on their side, that you're not their opponent. You're not there to change them. You're there to help them get help. Why are you here?
Yeah.
What can I do to help you? How can we make you the person God wants you to be right now?
That's actually exactly where I was going to go. So maybe if I'd kept my mouth shut for 3 more seconds. But that point about, you're trying to become the person God wants you to be now. And on the surface, that can sound like a cliche or just kind of corny or something. Like, what does that even mean? What are you talking about? And I'm very cheese averse in that I don't like corny, cheesy, campy things.
And yet you tell terrible jokes all the time.
But they're great, though.
When your first child is born, you earn the right to tell bad jokes.
Okay. So it's your cheese, and that's all right.
It's my cheese is fine. So anyways, there's so many things to this that have actually been on my heart a lot lately, and so I'm going to throw some of these at you, and I just want to get your reaction. So, first of all, it is true that... so why does the Lord want me to be the person that he wants me to be? Well, because out of all of the people that have ever been created, right, God makes each soul intentionally. God makes each person...
Unrepeatable.
Yes. Unique, truly unique. I mean, you've never existed before, you will never exist again. And makes each person so that that individual can love and glorify God in a way that no other person in history before or after ever can, right? And it's so foundational and so basic that we tend to kind of brush past it, but it's something we got to keep at the fore. Then there's this other, going to the next layer. There are also, it's true, parts of my personality, habits, thought patterns, things that are unhealthy, things that are not how the Lord wants me to be. And maybe personality is the wrong word there. It depends on how we're defining it. But what I'm getting at is Vincent is a certain way. Vincent can be a grump. Vincent can whatever, right? Well, the Lord doesn't want that. But there's things that are in me that in order for me to become the saint that I'm supposed to be, need to change. Because... and so there is a lot of work I think individuals have to do to kind of parse out what is it in me that needs to go away? What is it in me that needs to be purified? What is it in me that is good and needs to grow?
And that takes some getting used to.
Yeah. And it's, that's easy to say, but it's a lifetime of work. Because, and this is a thought from someone I know, and we were talking about this the other day, that the call to live the gospel is not exhausted. The person of Jesus Christ is not exhausted in any particular way of living the gospel. So even if John becomes fully the saint that he's supposed to be, utterly flawless, or me or you,
there's a lot of hope there.
There's the person of Jesus Christ is still not exhausted.
Yeah, you can't reach your full
infinity.
capacity. The only person who ever did that was Mother Mary. right? And
Well, but that's not what I mean necessarily.
Right.
That is true. But what I mean is even Mother Mary at her full capacity
it did not exhaust her son.
didn't.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so
It's amazing.
And so, like, is with counseling? That was very long-winded. But with counseling, is it that you're sort of helping that process along? Because and the reason why I ask about counseling specifically is sometimes that's spiritual direction, and spiritual direction and counseling are not the same thing.
They're not.
So,
They're related, but they're very different.
yeah, that wasn't even really a question. That was a lot of thoughts.
No, how do you guide people into that space of seeking a fuller capacity with the recognition of the God who is guiding them, who cannot be fully reached or understood, right?
Yeah. Well, as we all know, like, everything that's good comes from God. Everything we can ever do comes from God. All of the act of being here or anything good, anything we do comes from God. Not in the sense that like he's controlling us, but all grace comes from him. So when you have an ailment, addiction, a mental illness, mental illness versus mental health, they're kind of, it's important that people understand that like being bipolar is a disorder that's part of your neurology and who you are. It's not like something you had happened to you that made you who you are. Well, rather, that could have happened, but I mean in the sense of that's a mental disability or ailment. I want to be careful with how I say things.
Yeah, because words definitely matter in this case.
I mean, I'm just started practicing this week pretty much, and I've seen some clients with my internship, but I'm no expert, or rather, I'm no exhaustive expert on any of this. So
does that make you a rookie? I mean,
100%. Yeah, I mean, every single counselor is learning till the day they die. You're never going to exhaust the knowledge you can learn to help people. Every person you meet is completely new. I have to always try to temper my words with the message of, if you want to get the facts that you want to be informed, I would go read something specifically and get that. I more want to give like an overarching story of how I see things. So to answer, like, how do you help people, be more who they're supposed to be, on that note of like, if you have bipolar, that's different from an addiction. It's also different from like trauma. They're all different things. And having a biological defect or feature about you that makes you have a disorder or something is different from, I don't know, you're raised and your father was very authoritarian and you learn might makes right. So first of all, learning what the client is suffering from and how, because no one suffers the same. Someone who is a war veteran who saw intense combat, their trauma is just as important to you as some woman who had her purse stolen. Like snatched, not at gunpoint, but like it's like could be a trauma, but like you typically wouldn't think that's something crazy compared to war. But to each person, they're both fully equal, and so you should always treat them that way too. So, it kind of comes down to just seeing the person as, a fully realized person in God's eyes and treating them that way instead of, oh, my depressed client's coming and I have to go talk to them. It's like, no, like once you do that, you're already losing the battle in some way because now you're biased now in a negative light towards someone who you don't want to talk to.
Yeah.
And that's, everyone suffers from that. There's burnouts, there's bias, there's so many things that counselors go through that they need to keep in check.
Yeah, because you also have to maintain some kind of boundaries.
Yeah, so boundaries are super important too.
You don't allow a client to usurp your time or
your role,
your emotions, or your role, right? Suddenly.
And you're in the privacy and everything. There is a place for the spiritual direction. I think is a really interesting point because I think a lot of people might look at Catholic counseling as spiritual direction, but that's a dangerous line that we don't want to cross. I don't want to tell you what to do. Now, if you come in and you have some questions in the midst of counseling about, something, I could probably direct you. I think it's more ethical that you would direct people to, what does the church say about this? Instead of just telling them something. I don't want to be that counselor who is kind of full of myself and arrogant and tells someone, yeah, it's okay that you do that. The church says this, but no, you don't. That's like the worst thing you can do. What is the saying in the Bible? If it's better that you had a millstone thrown around your head than to mislead children. And that's for children, which is like really bad. But, it's still pretty bad if you're in a position of authority and power, or rather perceived power, because I don't have any power. It's more of people trust me. And if I mislead them,
James says, I think about this all the time, not many should aspire to be teachers, because teachers will be held to a stricter judgment.
Yeah. Well, look at politicians nowadays.
Yes,
gosh.
Exactly. And that's why the church, I think, has a certain kind of influence. And when there is scandal within the church, it's so much worse, right, in people's minds and hearts. I would say the relationship, and I might be wrong, but just hear me out. The relationship between spiritual direction and counseling is more like the hierarchical approach to seeking guidance from the Spirit and the charismatic approach to seeking healing from the Spirit, right? So in one sense, you have the sacramental structure. Generally, traditionally, when you're seeking spiritual direction, you're going toward, a priest or consecrated religious, or someone who has some kind of certification or experience in this. On the strictly spiritual level, where they're talking about the sacramental life of the church and your relation with God and prayer in those ways. With counseling, it really relates to that in the sense where, like, you might be going through deliverance prayers of healing, right? Or like writing out battle plans to overcome addiction. And part of that is going to confession, right? Or having a spiritual director. So like there's interplay between the two, but they have their own camps in many ways.
Well, actually, interestingly enough, I learned the point on spiritual direction. Originally, spiritual direction was actually a lay endeavor that began after Christianity became legalized in the Roman Empire. And,
I think it was the Desert Fathers who probably made it more clerical in that sense.
So people were seeking spiritual direction. It ended up being a lay endeavor that nowadays we think spiritual direction, we think priest or religious, but
that's not always the case.
Not necessarily so. But the other, one of the key things, there's a great book on spiritual direction, by the way, called Journey to God by
Father, no.
Dan Burke.
Yeah, that's right.
I think.
That's a different one. I was thinking of another one. Keep going.
But anyways, so that a lot of great information about what is spiritual direction, how to discern whether you need spiritual direction versus counseling. So I recommend that people check that out. But the other thing that comes to mind differently is in spiritual direction, I'm obliged to reveal my conscience to my spiritual director. And there is a real, because my spiritual director is helping me to discern the will of God in my life, both generally and specifically. Well, there's an obligation to reveal my conscience in that way, where maybe not so much in counseling. I suppose it'd be a good idea in counseling.
Well, my own disposition toward it was that you should be vulnerable and honest.
Yeah.
As much and often as possible.
Yeah. You're definitely
at appropriate levels.
You're definitely encouraged, to be honest with, your conscience and what you're feeling. Like, if you feel like something's not working, tell your counselor, I don't think this is working, or I don't like what we're doing. Like, it's you that they're helping. You control everything. They're just there to guide you. They're like that. They're like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. They're literally guiding you through Middle Earth.
That's what. So you're saying the counselor is like Gandalf in this case.
Yeah,
that's pretty legit.
In a way,
I kind of like that.
I don't have any cool elven swords. I'm not a wizard, but you're guiding people, through a lot of scary times. There's like anecdotally, there's a form of a technique, EMDR.
Oh yes.
So there's one similar to that called
following the lights.
Yeah, there's one. I don't really know much about EMDR, but there's one called exposure therapy that is very similar, and you essentially are the rock in this relationship with the client, and you just tell them, talk about your, I don't know,
Really intense trauma.
Exactly, yeah. Talk about some crazy trauma you've been through. And they come in knowing, inside and foremost, that you're going to kind of like, you're not going to force them, obviously, but you're going to encourage them.
They are
to tell,
wanting you to poke and prod them in intentional ways with direct questioning to help them.
What happened next?
Directly address
so you
their
have them
trauma.
relive a trauma. And
they're giving you permission to do so.
Exactly. And you saw on these forums. And the point of it is for this intense trauma, whatever it may be, car crash, etc., is typically person-on-person trauma. Those are like the deepest ones because they're the most egregious. You're taking away someone's freedom in that moment or whatever. So you walk through their story, and the point is to get them super elevated. And or this is how I see it. Again, if I had to look at what exposure therapy actually is, there might be a little bit things, but I see it as the client is retelling their story and they're getting super anxious, they're crying, whatever they're doing. And we know that when you're stressed, your stress levels can never maintain that peak. They always come down. So by going back to that intense story over and over, like what they do in EMDR as well, it has no power over you anymore because you face it. One of my professors says that avoidance is the cause of all your problems. If you just stop avoiding things, and I see that for myself. If I just stop avoiding whatever work I have to do, instead of like watching YouTube or something for like 20 minutes, I could just do my work and I wouldn't feel so anxious about like the work I have to do or something.
Avoidance is the cause of all your problems. What a profound statement.
And
and that speaks so beyond just trauma. That's like procrastination, right?
Yeah, don't avoid the hardships in life because the secular world sees pain and suffering as bad. While we see pain and suffering, JP2 himself is like, don't waste your suffering. It's so powerful. That's like, if what your actions are good that you do are good things, and you don't ever use your suffering, that's like half your life. Or whatever, I'll just use 50-50. That's a lot of offering up, a lot of, secular word, no pain, no gain. That's the exact same thought. Don't waste your suffering. Like, there's a reason for your suffering. Actually, 2016, I went to a local community college to get my associates because I didn't stay at my first school for very long, and I was the only person in my class who believed that suffering had meaning. And my professor called me out, and he invited me to go to lunch and talk about it with him, and I was like, I just believe that, I wasn't articulate, I was younger at the time, but like, I was just blown away that people don't believe in the merit of, suffering and stuff. Because people just don't have the same worldview.
If you don't believe in heaven, or if you don't believe that to get to heaven there is some kind of death, because you have to die eventually, right? Which is the worst kind of suffering. That's a very hopeless worldview. I had a professor in college who had that same. Yeah. I also had lunch with him, and the similar questions. It's hard.
And this is like a graying hair, like 50-year-old guy, maybe 60 at the time, but like. I have never seen at that age. I would always look up to those people. It's like, okay, they know their stuff, all this stuff, and obviously he still knows his stuff. But like, it's just kind of like, what am I? At the time I was probably like maybe 20-ish, not even. I was just kind of like, this person is coming to asking me, like genuinely, like, how do you think suffering has meaning? And I'm just like, I don't know, as Vincent mentioned like a little while ago, like there's a lot of things that we just take for granted in our faith because they're so simple, or that like this is how we see the world, that when they're challenged, you're kind of like...
Wait, you don't believe that?
Well, like, I mean, for me, like, an abortion is like, I look at an actual child and then I'm just like, you're going to destroy this. And that's just as simple as it is for me. I'm obviously like, there's way more to it that I believe, but like... Well,
especially if someone's experienced that trauma.
Yeah,
how do you guide someone through those layers who don't believe that?
So, on that topic of like suffering, it's like
what are you most passionate about in counseling? Like, what are the things that what kinds of wounds or people perhaps maybe that they aren't their wounds obviously, but like the things that really hope to bring hope and a light to.
As of now, I wouldn't say I have a passion or something I want to focus on. I do have affinities for things. I think, amongst the Catholic sphere, I think scrupulosity everyone suffers from it. Like a lot of people come in who are self-labeled Catholics. They come in and they're like, a lot of the depression comes from scrupulosity in a way. One of my classes said that depression is formed or created, whatever the word is, when your actions and your beliefs or ideals do not match. So if you're living a life of sin, yet you still hold certain moral truths and you're going contrary to it, you're going to widen that gap of depression in your life because, what I'm kind of getting at is scrupulosity is affected a lot. A lot of people are affected by it. But the affinity, I think, just to be honest, like so many people suffer from pornography, particularly young men. And I don't want to be negative, but like, I would probably bet that like any random person, or rather almost any person I ever chose off the side of the street would suffer from it, whether they said themselves, whether they agreed to that or not. So what I'm getting at is,
you could almost pick someone off the street, and odds are they have a pornography addiction.
Yes, and I think it's probably most likely or guaranteed. I would say that 99 out of 100 times probably. It's just that infested society. But now I completely forgot where I was.
Well, what are you most passionate about?
Okay, yeah. So the affinity towards that, because I suffered myself from it, and I think that, for example, a lot of people try to go to counseling for addictions. Let's just use again, like you're young, maybe you're in your 20s, you're a Catholic male, and you're struggling with pornography. You come in and you think the cause of your problem is because you're a terrible person. The cause of your problem is that from a young age, very often, you've lost your willpower to say no to lust. So we can get into a whole debate of whether you're even culpable anymore at that point, because addictions are when you lose, well, whether it's a behavioral or a chemical addiction, the DSM that we use doesn't have pornography as an addiction because it's a behavioral issue, which, yes, that's true. But, I think there's some agendas behind the scenes, as we all are probably aware. So,
yes, of course. I mean, pornography is searching for you because of the algorithms and the people out there trying to target particular people.
So,
just trying to reach these people, recognizing that even someone who experiences pornography addiction, there are layers that cause them to go toward those things.
And people hate themselves because of it. But like, does God look at you that way? Does God love you any less because you're stuck in a pattern of sin that you're incapable of getting out of it by yourself? You are so far gone on this road that your will is kind of non-existent. You're compelled to act, and then at the end of it, you're like, what? So that applies to all kinds of addictions,
Yeah, because that's not just pornography. That's any addiction.
Anything, yeah.
Doesn't mean it's completely gone.
No,
just like we're not utterly depraved, totally depraved.
Because God's grace in any moment can give you the strength.
Right.
But typically that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And that speaks a little bit to me between the difference between guilt and contrition. Because you can feel guilty and still end up in hell, But contrition, on the other hand, right? Because guilt is not sufficient. Guilt is just I feel bad because the internal mechanisms of my soul scream out when I have severed my relationship with God. Versus contrition is you may still feel guilt, right? Well, but you're not really in control of whether you feel guilt. And contrition is the choice to say, I choose differently.
Yeah, in this moment.
I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
And so
I'm sorry and I want to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if someone's coming to you and they're saying, I have this problem, it needs to die. It needs to go away. And so expressing obviously the sorrow, the contrition, but then, even going to the counselor is, I think it's something we need to affirm as a very good and frankly
courageous
thing to do. Yes. Because, despair is easy. Despair is easy and very tempting. And I speak for myself as well, that despair can be a temptation, even over like little stupid things. And then you look back later and like, oh, that was clearly, spiritual attack. But despair is easy. Seeking out help is courageous and cool and based and like all of the things, like whatever, you need to hear.
Counseling is based. That is true.
Catholic counseling is based.
Catholic counseling is based, yes.
At least,
yes,
anyways.
yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's just something, because this is obviously, we've waded into these very sensitive waters. And so I do think it's important to note that, like, especially if this is, anybody that's listening, struggling with this, that like the Lord's not given up on you. And like, there's...
You're a good person in the sense of you are made in the image and likeness of God. You are made for goodness, beauty, and truth. And you can find your way there. I'm just going to say it right to the audience. I mean, if you are struggling with pornography addiction or any kind of addiction, you can find help. You're not alone, and you are loved. That's one of the biggest lies I think we believe, is that we're unlovable. Or if people really knew me for what I've seen or done, they couldn't love me. And that's one of the biggest lies that we have to renounce and be delivered from. That you are lovable, that you can find real love.
You're not defined by your actions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And speaking of that, just as, to tie in an earlier point, just as, someone living their life to their fullest capacity, the glory of God being man fully alive does not exhaust the person and the goodness of Jesus Christ. Your sin, there is no sin that God cannot forgive except the refusal to seek forgiveness.
The refusal of
except
mercy.
for the refusal.
So
of
I have a
repentance,
practical question for someone who might be listening. How do you find healing and deliverance from something like pornography addiction? What would be practical steps? If it is somehow possible, like we keep saying, what would be those steps?
Well, first of all, it's definitely possible. I myself a testament to that. How many years? Probably 15-ish years at some point in my life. And then
15 years from with freedom, or
oh no 15 years like length of it
in slavery to it.
Slavery
Yeah.
It's, and that's like kind of why in the beginning when I mentioned I was kind of like aimless, like that's why, because it drains you of your humanity, and as a man it drains you of your masculinity. You just have no drive. I mean, I don't blame any young man or woman who falls into it, because it's so powerful. It's almost impossible to not be gripped by it in some way. It's more of, once you should look at yourself as being valuable, as being worthwhile, and that, there's so much sin out there that grips you. And ironically, that's okay. For me, my sins and my life, I think, is made better because I've come out of it. Everything's always green on the other side. God couldn't even use the greatest sins or that you think you've gone through for myself in ways that turn it around incredibly. Like my view on marriage and everything, I think is stronger because I've been through the hell on the other side. When you've seen what it does to yourself and others, you're even more disgusted by it, rather than like, oh, I shouldn't do it for the sake of not doing it. It's like, I wish I could say that I don't do sinful things because I love God, but I'm not there yet. I'm there because, I'm afraid of hell and I'm afraid of disappointing God. Obviously, you want to get to that point of not sinning because of love of God, but if you're not there yet, that's okay. And most of us probably won't ever get there.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, that's why, I mean, even like the church recognizes, contrition is required for, a valid confession, but perfect contrition is not. You can come in with imperfect contrition.
Right, because otherwise none of us have
we
hope.
would all be doomed.
Yeah, exactly.
And the difference, if anybody doesn't know, imperfect contrition is, I'm sorry for my sins because, I'm afraid of hell.
Because I dread the loss of heaven and the pains of hell. But then you say, but mostly because I have offended you, Lord.
And that's perfect contrition is fear of, it's sorrow for having sinned because of love of God.
Yeah.
And so we want to get to perfect contrition, but most of the time, we're hanging out in imperfect contrition territory.
So getting back to John's question, like what's a practical thing you can do? I think it depends on the person. Speak for myself. Ironically, I think mine was kind of miraculous. The day that I decided to date my now wife, like it kind of became almost perfectly. Well, how do I start that again? It became very easy to avoid it, and that's only from the grace of God. Because you can't just go from 0 to. You can't just go from 100 to stop.
Yeah, that's miraculous. I would say in this culture.
It wasn't perfect, but it was like it was pretty much perfect. So that's obviously you can hope for that, but you never want to act based on God acting a miracle in your life. So practical thing. Honestly, I think the number one thing is isolation. If you are alone, you're never getting out of it. I'm a big proponent for 12-step programs. I've seen multiple family members, distant family members and stuff, and other people in my life who, whatever addiction or they were suffering from that was 12-step related that you could do the 12-step programs, and it helped them incredibly because 12-step is built on, having a higher power, having someone or something, whatever you believe in, outside of yourself and community. If you're alone, you're as good as dead. The devil has got you, and you're not going to get free. Oh, that's obviously not true. You can happen. God can do something. He can do things, but you never
the truth that sets you free, and truth requires communicating with others.
Become in communion with other people. Get out, do things with people, share with people. John was saying earlier. It was about. It's very often that people don't want to talk about their issues, and that like people are afraid that if I say that I'm addicted to whatever, people are going to judge me. But ironically, it's kind of the opposite. People feel like connected to you. So often in books or stories of people's lives, of their addiction or their trauma, they think I'm the only one who's ever gone through this, which is complete nonsense. So many people have gone through what you've gone through. So becoming in communion with other people and sharing your stories, connect with people, just makes it so much more meaningful and powerful because now you have others who've gone through what you've gone through. So you can talk about everything and, that starts the journey. So yes, practically isolation's a bad idea. Try to get out. When I say get out, you don't have to just get out of your room or whatever. I would, get in connection with people, find people who care about you and you can talk to them about things. For me, spiritual direction was one of those. I credit my priest back at home for kind of kicking that off. I don't know how I got into spiritual direction, but I just somehow got the guts to ask him. And then that kind of spurred me on to trying to discern priesthood for like a little while. But I was, I guess, talking about incomplete, or what was the word? Contrition? Imperfect contrition. Yeah. I kind of had like an imperfect vocational search because I was empty. I had nothing. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll go to this. The classic young man thinks that because he has no girlfriend that he should become a priest. It's like, well, okay.
Right. Dude, that was my life.
And it's funny because I went to this one retreat just because I wanted to go. And I like a seminary is probably one of the most fun places on earth. Those guys are so happy. They're having so much fun. And it's contagious. And the vocational director there was like, yeah, you're not ready. I'm like, oh, I know I'm not ready. I just want to talk to you about things. And he was kind of like, oh, okay. Because he wasn't expecting like such like honesty. Like as I said earlier, it's cathartic to come out and tell people like I've suffered from this. Like, oh yeah, me too. And like, if you're suffering from it, I can speak, like, if you're suffering from it as a young male, there's likely the person next to you's probably had gone through it, and they'll probably be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. Like, it's kind of cool to have like a problem to share with people. I don't want to glorify having issues.
No,
honestly.
no, that's not it. That's not it. What you are as a witness to the resurrection.
Yeah.
That's a different thing.
I've come out. I've come out of the tomb.
You're not focusing on, and I looked at this scene and I watched this video and this is the thing I did next. And, like, that's scandalous.
Yeah,
that's,
no one enjoys
you
that.
don't
And if they
speak
do, they
about the
haven't
fruitless
chosen,
works of darkness.
If they do that, they haven't truly. They're not trying to get better.
Correct.
If you're resharing your glory days and stuff,
Right.
Or
and almost like as a way to affirm what you did was in fact somehow bad or shocking. Obviously, everyone knows that. You don't need to talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
And when you mention, hey, I had this addiction or went through this kind of trauma, the person who relates to you knows exactly what you're talking about. And even someone who hasn't gone through it probably knows that it's bad, and you don't, and they're inspired by the profundity of that. You're even able to talk about that you've gone through that.
Yeah.
To be a witness on that level is inspiring.
counseling is based.
Yeah, it is.
I think a lot of this speaks to the very I don't know what the right word I'm looking for is. We're so pressured by the culture to identify with or as our sin. And I mean, that seems, and you hear this identity, this word, and it's kind of become this sort of nebulous, amorphic kind of meaning, somewhat meaningless word. But like, identity is also like this core thing. But we're also pressured to identify with or as our sin, and like that is so. I mean, it's so harmful, because it's be like somebody identifying as their whatever other problem that may not be necessarily sinful, but they're coming in to see a counselor about this thing and saying, I am at my core depression or addiction or what have you. But it's like, so on the one hand, you have the kind of darker side of that, of like identifying as our sin can lead us into these spirals that feel inescapable. But then on the other side of it, you have the freedom that the Lord offers, that of the truth, which will make you free, that you're not that. Like, you are not your pornography addiction. You are not your alcoholism. You are not your depression. You are not your whatever. That is not who you are. You're a son of God. You are a daughter of God. And speaking of things that are so fundamental that we brush past them, like and I say this as the guy who needs to do this more, but really think that we need to spend more time with just that fact, just that you are a child of God, and he's not standing there ready to throw you into hell at the nearest opportunity. So often we have, and speaking of scrupulosity, I mean, that's like at the core is like this feeling like God is waiting for any chance to just throw me
Smite us.
No, that is not.
Has it happened to anybody yet?
Who God is. That is
Divine justice is simply God allowing us to cast ourselves into hell and judge ourselves.
Yeah.
And divine mercy is the arms stretched open the moment we recognize that he's right there waiting for us to thrust ourselves into him.
Yeah. Well, and Vincent has a great point, because when we use words like hot or sexy to describe people, whatever, I found out in the past few years, like, I was always kind of like, what's wrong with that? I didn't like it, but I was like, what's wrong with it? I couldn't articulate it. And someone said, like, it doesn't fully describe the person. You're not describing who they are. When they're beautiful, they're whatever. You're describing who they are fully. So in a similar vein, like, if I am this, I'm defining myself like this, you're not describing yourself of who you truly are. You're only finding a part, and you're finding the bad part. You're not finding all the goodness that's there. I can speak for myself. I didn't think I was a terrible person, but I definitely didn't like myself. And I was definitely kind of in a bad place. But, I recognize that God gives you infinite chances. When you're contrite and everything, of course. You can't just keep doing it over and over and again, it's okay. No. So for myself, it was this whole journey of, oh, wait a second, no, I am good. I can love somebody. I am lovable. And just like that, obviously it wasn't a miracle cure immediately, but it gave me the strength to persevere until the images and everything became way less powerful. They kind of lose their hold over you.
They do.
That was a wild,
and they would fade over time, right?
That was a wild, and the intense reaction you get when they pop in your head just is gone. It's not gone, obviously, and they're never going to be. That's something we should be aware of too. That when you get over an addiction, you don't get over it. It's not possible. You can replace it with something else, and I replaced it with goodness and others and communion with people, rather than isolation and video games all day, every day.
And that's the power of theology of the body.
Yeah,
Transforming
it's so
your
simple.
ethos. What are you attracted to? What are you repulsed by?
Yeah.
Christ came to change, literally transform the very desires of our hearts so that we desire the good, the true, and the beautiful. And we allow him to untwist the distorted images and words so that words like hot and sexy, when you have the proper anthropological and theological grounding of who the person is, the very use of those words now takes on the meaning of the person. But most people don't have that maturity and can't go there without a long period of purgation, illumination, before you can get to unity, right? And that's the mystery, right? But there's so much more that we could talk about to address things like pornography addiction or other things. And as you get started meeting with clients, whether it's people experiencing addiction or abuse or any other kind of trauma or need, anxiety, right? I mean, that's legitimate enough, right? There's going to be more, I think, themes that maybe you might feel passionate and called to talk about. And it'd be great to have you back on, right? For an ongoing,
time will elucidate what I'm good at. What's my specialty? What am I drawn to? Maybe it's this population of people, maybe it's that. And no one can be for it all. It's actually best if you choose one portion of it.
Yeah.
Being eclectic in everything it's good, but jack of all trades, master of none.
Right. You'll find that what you need to intentionally focus on, maybe it's starting a recovery group for men or some kind of trauma group for women or something like that, right? There's different ways to reach. So how can people find you and get an appointment with Andrew Van Roie, the new counselor for Good Shepherd Institute of the Bluegrass?
So you can go to familyrenewalproject.com. There is a little banner in there for Catholic counseling. My schedule is really open right now, so come on by. Whatever the issue is, let's talk.
That's awesome. And we are definitely praying for you, Andrew, as you get started, because I know this is a big chapter in your life and a lot has built to it. I want to commend you for your courage and your witness to what you've experienced, because that's vulnerability. But I think by you sharing that, it actually will draw people to you to be vulnerable about their own sufferings in some way. Yeah. And that you're there primarily not to tell them what to do, but to listen. Yeah. And to propose ideas and to give them encouragement. So God bless you, brother.
Thank you.
So with that, you got any final thoughts? Anything that you want to say to the audience before we jump off?
If I start saying something else, it'll go on for a while. So maybe next time my life
we'll
story
bring you
will
back
come
in a
out or
few
something.
months.
Yeah,
that's good plan.
Go into who are you, childhood and everything.
Yes.
I can tell some of those funny stories.
Yes, and that's the piece of this podcast. I feel the stability of just come back, and we'll be intentional about that.
Counseling.
We've said that with other guests, and it hasn't always manifested itself. But that's how life works sometimes. But we can be intentional about this.
It's just
too,
like counseling. We don't have to say everything in one go.
Exactly.
It's a long process.
It's a relationship. So
Exactly.
praise God. All right, everyone. Thank you all again so much for watching this episode. We just ask that you like and subscribe and really follow and share this video, especially with someone you think who might benefit from Catholic counseling, to really get that holistic view and understanding of the human person, that they can get the kind of help they need so that they can move forward with their life with confidence toward the promised land. So we'll see you again next time on another episode of Spirit and Spire. God bless.